All right, welcome everyone to another YANA program that's part of our Pursuing Your Mission series. Tonight is about AI and technology for nonprofits. We've been doing these monthly programs focused on other sharing and learning topics between our annual fall conferences. You probably have seen our emails, I hope. Some of you have registered. Our fall conference will be on October 24th at the Yale Club in New York City. Tickets and sponsorship opportunities are available, and I'm sure Kristen, our executive director, we'll have more to say about that when we close out towards the end. A few logistics, as you can see, we are recording the program. We'll try to get this edited and up on our YouTube channel within a week or so, and we will allow times for questions. I was going to say we normally monitor the chat and Q&A, but it looks like Zoom has no longer a Q&A function, so we'll try to keep an eye on the chat. The goals of tonight is to give you some insights into the sort of large-scale influences and issues on AI and the social impact sector, and also some practical technology implementation cases for nonprofits. And I'm sure many of you might have some particular use cases. So let me introduce our speakers, and then we've got a quick poll so we can have some audience interaction. First, Brigitte Hoyer Gosselink, who is SOM class of 2011. Brigitte is Director of AI and Social Impact at Google, where she leads initiatives leveraging emerging technologies to address global challenges. Over the past day at Google, it's google.org, should be clear. She's overseen more than $500 million in funding to help organizations responsibly harness technology for social good. And these span AI applications, climate solutions, crisis response, education, and accessibility initiatives. Before Google, Brigitte worked at the Bridgespan Group, USAID, and other international development organizations where she brought innovative approaches across the social and public sectors. Brigitte holds an MBA from Yale School of Management and a BS in Systems Engineering from the University of Virginia. Welcome, Brigitte, and thank you for joining us. We also have Mark Lee, class of 2004. Mark serves as Managing Director of Executive Project Management at NYC Kids RISE, where he oversees New York City's Save for College program, facilitating goal setting, standardizing project management practices, and managing large-scale technology implementations. It sounds like he's done a lot. His career spans both public and private sectors, including roles as a project manager at Capital One's Commercial Bank, a management consultant at Public Works Partners, the assistant commissioner at New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, and program manager at the New York City Department of Small Business Services, so quite a range. Mark graduated from Yale College with a degree in history, and he brings a unique blend of operational expertise and strategic project management to nonprofit technology challenges. Thank you both for joining us. Now let's get started. We're curious to know about our audience very quickly, so we're going to launch a little technology poll. Couple of questions. I think there are 5 or 6 questions. I just want to get a sense. Can you guys see the answers? No, I think this, yeah, you can. Okay. There used to be, I don't, you'll have to forgive me. All right, come on, folks. Let's see. We've got executive directors, board members, other volunteers, consultants, people interested in the topic. Somewhat familiar seems to be the biggest category with technology and AI. That's good. Most, let's see, we got most budgets are below 5 million. Let's see where the most is. It looks between 100 and 500,000, and then between 1 million and 5 million. So only a couple over 5 million. So Mark and Bridget, it just gives you an idea. Question about how much people spend on their annual budget, less than 5%. And a couple of people have no idea, but it looks like it's a pretty small amount. They've got some internal technology. That's really good to see, internal technology experts in both staff and board. It's kind of split between that and no internal expertise at all. And most people are interested in learning about how they can use AI technology to enhance their operations. Awesome. Thank you, guys. I don't know if I can share how that works, but okay. All right, so let's get started and jump right in. Brigitte, if you could lead us off kind of setting up the landscape and talk about the intersections of AI technology, particularly AI and nonprofits and the social impact sector in general.
First of all, Rachel, thanks so much for organizing this and for having me. It's great to be with you all this afternoon and evening. So the way that I think about this, and I've been working in the kind of AI and social impact intersection for the past 8 years. So I also like to remind us that this is new and not new. We've kind of been working through this as a sector. AI means a lot of things, not just the large language models that we are kind of used to, the shorthand meaning now with tools like ChatGPT, or in the case of Google, Gemini. But I think the framework that I've kind of come to for this is in three parts. So the first is just the use of AI for either individual or organizational productivity and effectiveness. And this can be, a lot of work that happens kind of in the back office. It can sometimes be, the way that we're all experimenting with using AI in our individual workflows. Hopefully everyone's kind of leaned in to try and do that. And I think this is a place where we're seeing a lot of opportunity, frankly, right? The tools right now are pretty good at maybe finding some different efficiencies, and obviously depending on the workflow. And we'll come back to, I think, some of those examples. The second category is in the actual programmatic interventions themselves. And this is actually where I've spent probably the most of my time, is really thinking about how do we transform what's possible to deliver from a programmatic perspective, because we now have this technology. So that might mean, using machine learning to better target interventions based on additional factors that are now able to be analyzed. It could mean serving and reaching out to populations that perhaps we never had the resources to serve before. And I think in a lot of places where we've sort of tracked data with the organizations that we supported through google.org, we do still think about that as kind of either a cost savings or a time savings, or an ability to reach the outcomes that we want to reach with fewer resources. But I think fundamentally, in some cases, we're actually even also doing things that we were just never physically been possible before. Translating into every language all at once, for example, is not something that we could have done a couple of years ago. Or thinking about measuring climate change across the entire globe. Things that just, this technology has unlocked and will continue to, I think, unlock. And so I think that innovation space is the second. And then the third and final is just, as we think about AI kind of continuing to permeate through society, it will, of course, intersect with the issue areas that any individual organization in the nonprofit community is working on, whether that be in the kind of jobs sector, which, of course, has gotten a lot of headlines, thinking about, the way that we think about healthcare, the way that we think about education. All of this will be affected by AI. And so I think actually, probably the easiest place to start, and also the hardest place to start in some ways, because it doesn't require technology, but does require for future thinking about society, is really kind of leaning into be understanding what those potential impacts could be, and really at the table, hopefully, in shaping the future outcomes that we want to have. And we really need civil society to be at the table as shapers of this future direction for AI.
We need everybody in there. It's coming. It's going to be more impactful. Sounds like in a lot of different areas. Mark, if you could kind of, bring us maybe some specifics, tell us about the work that you do, and then also what your general approach is to using technology to improve mission delivery, whether that's government or nonprofit.
Sure thing. And again, Rachel, thanks so much for inviting me and having me on this panel. I'm very passionate about technology, although as you can see from kind of my career path, I've done a lot of things and for a lot of different types of organizations, and I do fashion myself as a generalist for sure, and that plays into kind of what I do in my job. I'm actually not in a technology specific role, but I do a lot of work with technology. There's half of my work, and by the way, I should also add that the organization that I work for administers the so-called Safe for College program on behalf of basically every New York City public school kids. And we're a small organization, about 50 of us, that will scale to eventually working with about 1 million families. So with that in mind, my time is split kind of half and half, doing one half is kind of like organizational planning kind of for the year ahead, setting goals, articulating those goals and objectives to staff, and helping arrange kind of resources and work plans for across the board to execute on all of that. The other half of my job is spent on, like, very specifically on technology project management, and let's call it delivery and change management. Those are other kind of buzzwords that you've probably heard before, and that is really the through line that goes across practically everything that I've done in my varied and colorful career. And what that entails is basically saying, okay, we procured this expensive new technology, or we have had a team of developers internally work on this for a year or however long, and let's actually deploy this. Let's get this into the real world, into the hands of our staff, in a lot of cases, into the cell phones, literally in the hands of the external constituents, stakeholders, and let's make this really work for everyone. And if the part of the question here is like, how do I approach my work overall? And how do we approach kind of the thinking, how do I think about getting technology to improve mission delivery for nonprofits? It really comes down to keeping stakeholders' actual needs and intent really in front and center of mind, being empathetic, and also being humble, not making assumptions about what it is that they need, how they're going to interact with technology, and kind of really, just taking the extra time to explore that and account for that. I can give so many examples ranging from New York City taxi drivers who, had wide range of language and technology proficiency, when could have run into so many unforeseen obstacles with using technology that we gave to try to make their lives easier. I'd also add to that the legion of vehicle owners who literally drove about 1,000 Toyota Camrys through a hole in a in a wall that we try to put up to kind of cap the number of Ubers hitting the roads of New York City. So, like kind of a limitation of our ability to understand our users, our stakeholders in that regard. And then some more recent example, coming face to face with many public school families in New York City who are confronted with a program that they might not be familiar with, and technology that you and I might consider to be a fairly simple thing, which is create an account and log in, but actually creates all sorts of different expected and unexpected challenges for them to encounter. So that's what makes the work challenging. That's what makes the work interesting. That's why I do it. It's why I'm also a journalist as well too, where I don't sit there and write computer code. I'm not an executive planning things. I'm constantly going back and forth between the parts of the organization that are managing the program, and then also the practical technology and getting it actually out into the field.
Perfect. Thank you for giving us. We've gotten some of the high level scope. Mark's given us some stuff on the ground and kind of what it's like, and some practical examples. Let's get into sort of like getting started and resource readiness. Like let's look at kind of from the nonprofit's perspective. Brigitte, from where you sit, and just your experience, what kind of organizational readiness factors should nonprofits look at before pursuing AI initiatives?
Getting a little bit of my lag here on Zoom. Sorry for that.
No worries.
So I think that one thing that's rapidly changing in front of us actually are these requirements. So I think my answer to this question 2 years ago, 6 months ago would have been different than it is today, and it will probably be different again in 6 months. And I think in some ways what's changing most is actually on two dimensions, right? There's a dimension of talent, right? What technical capabilities do you need to have to interact with these models, to implement these models, to think about just using AI in your workflows? I think the curve on that is coming down significantly. It has been over my entire time working on this, and it's now, of course, to the point where you can potentially have a tool actually instructing a tool for what to do. So I think a lot of that actually comes down to experimentation and getting people kind of who are safely using things, tools in your environment to try things. We've been working with a lot of organizations to, really try and say, hey, can create a sandbox, where you can just feel comfortable that what you're doing here, isn't going to affect anyone's ongoing work, isn't going to affect your ongoing programs, or where you're actually able to experiment across the board with possible use cases. I think the other thing I would say that's changing is actually the data question. So I think I used to talk a lot about kind of the need for data readiness, and that data readiness is still important. The sort of more structured and more labeled and more clear that your data is, the more capable models will be of interacting with it. But also, I think that what we think of as data is also evolving. So now, for example, it might be really useful for whatever evolution of models we have to say have a more structured way in which you perhaps save your files, right? Something that's like pretty simple, but labeling like these are the types of proposals that I would eventually submit to a government for a youth program. And actually these are proposals that are in our housing program. So that then if you want to call a model to say, hey, can you write me a housing proposal for a city government? The model's pulling from the right parts of your internal data. And then the last thing I would just mention quickly is, but obviously very importantly, is just thinking about the AI policies that you want to set as an organization. I'll happily share an organization that we work with closely called Fast Forward is doing a lot to support AI usage in the nonprofit sector. And they've built a little AI policy builder tool that allows you to kind of walk through where do you sort of feel comfortable drawing the line. And I think the answer to those questions depends a lot on what organization you're working in, right? What kind of data do you work with? How much are you interfacing with clients day to day, for example. And then the final thing I'll say is that, we have a bunch of tools at Google. So Gemini, our enterprise tool, is actually available for free to all nonprofits. That's the only enterprise grade free offering on the market. So if you're paying for something, try it. It's free. You might like it. And also Notebook LM and other tools are included in that. And I'll happily talk about what some of those tools are. I say that just because using the enterprise tools is actually really important potentially, right? These come with built-in security. They come with built-in kind of firewalling of your data. I think a lot of people worry about, if I upload this spreadsheet to an AI tool, where will it go? Well, if you're in the consumer model, it will sort of go into the mix. If you're in an enterprise grade model, it will be walled off. And so just an important kind of PSA. So I think also structuring kind of your thinking about what tools do you want to access and for what purposes do you all as an organization feel comfortable using them and having some of those governance policies in place so that you have a way to have that conversation across the organization with your employees who are almost certainly using these tools already and with boards as well.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on that real quick, and just like that readiness and that piece around the enterprise grade tools and the confidence that
before
the
you
information.
finish, Mark, can you guys just tell the audience what enterprise is, like, and how do they know whether they have an enterprise account or not? That's all. I've got to start real basic here.
Maybe I'll let Brigitte field that.
Yeah, so great question, and I'll drop in. I can drop in some resources here too. So an enterprise grade is just essentially it's a commercial offering. So it's what any business would buy to say, hey, we're actually want to use this. We want to use this model and tool specific to our enterprise. So if you have an email client that you're using, or Microsoft Word, or perhaps use Google Workspace, you're sort of living in an ecosystem of an enterprise product that's specifically designated for your organization. And the tools are built and the products are built on the technology side to say, hey, this is actually important that this all kind of lives in its own domain, right? Like I can't access from my domain your emails in your domain, for example. The same is true of these AI tools. So we're creating a world in which those AI models are interacting kind of only in the space of what you're uploading is staying within those same firewalls. And so that enterprise grade is just, kind of saying essentially like, hey, if you were, Walmart or UPS, you're buying these services. In this case, for Gemini, we're trying to give that same level of service for free so that organizations, nonprofits are able to benefit from those tools in that sort of secure and safe way without having to pay for them at the same level.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Sure thing. Yeah, the point I was going to piggyback on was that in recent conversations with nonprofit leaders, the points that Brigitte just made were not obvious, even to an audience of fairly seasoned and sophisticated executives. And this is an audience that was, very concerned about data privacy, about where the data was going, and being reassured that these safeguards are in place was just really critical to kind of getting over the hump to leading to an eventual adoption. And so that also say that that information should not be taken for granted about how that works and where the information goes and where it doesn't go.
Excellent, thank you. Let's kind of get back. The question was about readiness factors and kind of where these things might flow. From Mark, from your perspective, from project management, how do you scope the project, figure out who's supposed to do it, when it's ready to go? Just some viewpoints from inside and manage some of these projects.
Sure, and this applies, of course, and it maybe goes without saying, but I'll say it applies to the gamut of technology solutions, whether it's AI or something more traditional like a case management system or a CRM or something like that. And this is something that you'll probably hear repeated over and over again, is that when approaching potential technology solutions, it is absolutely critical to be very focused on the specific problem that you're actually trying to solve, right? Earlier we were talking about, sandboxing, experimenting with AI. Yes, all very good. And, the freeform experimentation for the sake of experimentation, very good. But when it comes to actually putting a project together, making a pitch to gather resources and establish organizational commitment to doing a thing, you got to be really razor sharp about what is this thing that I'm actually trying to solve. It's not just that my colleague in this other department just has a pet peeve and like wants to solve this like random thing. It's actually like an organizational wide issue or something that affects many of our stakeholders or clients at scale, and this is very specifically what it is that we are trying to solve. Other things in terms of just kind of initiating projects and kind of scoping these things out as well. Again, this is kind of general advice, and a lot of this will depend on the specific context, but I think it's helpful. Again, I'm thinking about smaller organizations, maybe with limited resources and budgets. And it's also piggybacks on the idea of experimentation as well. It is very helpful to start small when thinking about those specific problems that you're trying to solve, where you kind of narrowly tailor them and not try to solve all the problems all at once. That being said, that does need to be balanced with a global perspective on how the data is being managed, what different systems are being put into play, because then if you kind of let everybody initiate their projects on their own and solve their very specific problems, so that might all locally, in case-by-case basis, be beneficial, but you might have also created a set of dozen challenges where you've got your case management in one place and marketing in a different place, and that they don't speak to each other, and that you'll have a bigger problem trying to unify those systems at a later date. The last piece of advice I would that I would give in this mindset of like initiating new technology projects to solve problems is be very realistic with people's ability to absorb change and new systems. There's a bias, and I will fully admit to this as a tech enthusiast, someone who thrives on novelty, new apps, loves to download a new app and be the first to upgrade my operating system to try out the new bells and whistles. I have to constantly remind myself that that's not the norm. That's quite the opposite, quite the exception. And then the passion that someone like myself kind of advocating for and leading a technology project has for new technology solutions, that passion might not be shared with other people in the organization. We have a very different set of priorities and need to be kind of guided along and brought along a change journey, so that a project to bring new technology into the fold can be successful. And that's what I refer to as that kind of buzzword of quote unquote change management. Is really important and kind of a field unto itself. In fact, I've been in large organizations where there are dedicated change managers. When I learned that blew my mind. It was like not just the job of a boss or a project manager to do that. People could spend their entire 9-to-5 jobs and beyond that to be dedicated to change management. So again, those are kind of just some global thoughts there in terms of initiating technology projects.
Excellent. Brigitte, I have a question from where you've seen nonprofits. Do you think there's like a trend or maybe an over-reliance on using AI as a solution and then trying to find the problems? Because everybody wants oh, well, that'll I don't know, or by the time it gets to you to Google or what you've seen, people have actually really focused and they're really trying to solve a problem. Or do you find and there's a really kind of forcing it into an AI issue when maybe it's not?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we see that, and it's not new. We've seen that over the kind of life cycle of the technology. So just, I think, big +1 to Mark that there's, often a need to ask the question, do we need to be using AI for this? Or actually, is this a smaller sized problem that could be solved with something more simple? I will say that the technology is also, as these the sort of ease of use curve comes down as well. There's more places where it is more applicable than was the case certainly when we were building larger scale models 6-7 years ago. But that kind of problem framing and problem definition piece has not gone away. That also helps with, I think, some of the concerns that people often have around explainability, responsibility. All of that is made much more obvious if you think about sort of applying AI to a specific problem, because it gives you the ability to assess whether that is working to address your problem down the line. And that, I think, actually is something that most nonprofit leaders are actually really well equipped to do. We think about these kind of decisions all the times in nonprofits. Are we going to go and expand into a new area to serve a new community? Should we shift the curriculum that we're using or the training methodology? Should we bring in, a student support instead of a teacher support, right? These are programmatic decisions that are being made that, I think when we think especially about AI being used in programmatic areas, which is often an area of concern, I think actually most nonprofit leaders are pretty well equipped to be using their very good judgment. If you think about AI as just one more intervention that you're sort of thinking about incorporating. And I would say the seems a little bit true on the productivity side too, right? You want to make sure that you're not wasting cycles trying to spin up a big AI solution when actually maybe just a simple Excel spreadsheet is going to be a good fix for that. So I do think that's where, excuse me, both the experimentation, but also just having, excuse me, the right people asking the right questions is also very, very important. And that you have people kind of checking that along the way, that the investment's still worth it.
Got it. Excellent. We're going to probably return to some of these investment points, but let's get into what I'm sure a lot of people are facing is a lot of people in nonprofits really don't know how to use. I mean, some of the people on the call here, I mean, we've had people maybe who are a little bit more familiar. What are maybe some low-hanging fruit, Mark, we can start with you, that are applications to use technology, and then Bridget, if you want to jump in with AI, that are kind of making an immediate difference? Like maybe people, you mentioned programmatic, Bridget, but like Mark, some specific examples where some of our nonprofit leaders and folks on the call can start thinking about where they should maybe look first.
Yeah, we're thinking about like starting points, entry points, low-hanging fruit, and things like that. I'm going to start with just like kind of your basic productivity suite. And a lot of people here are probably on Google Workspace or the Microsoft equivalent, just for your basics in terms of email, calendar, documents, and spreadsheets, and those sorts of things. And what I would advocate for in this space here is dedicating time, energy, attention to enabling your team to use these tools in the right way. Just a little bit of attention and standardization and process documentation for whatever it is, recording donors, just using a donor spreadsheet, creating a spreadsheet for clients that you're working with. Anything that kind of goes beyond a single person, kind of using it for a very narrow use case. Once it goes beyond that, a little bit of documentation and standardization, socialization, and training goes a long way to having something that kind of is scalable and works over time. And this is well before you get to the point of we need to invest $1 million into Salesforce or some heavy duty expensive technology, or spin up a sophisticated AI solution for this, that, and the other. And one other specific thing here that I'll just advocate for in terms of low-hanging fruit, cost-effective solutions and things like that is a lot of organizations are kind of tempted to dive in on something like Slack, go all in on that. And just speak from my own experience as someone who used to use Slack and went to an organization that doesn't use Slack, Google G-Chat, that again comes with the Google Workspace that you're probably already paying for, can be kind of rigged into a version of Slack and solve some of those same problems as well too. I think Bridget might be able to speak more to that, but those are just a few things there. Again, just like the emphasis there on just using the tools that you have and investing in some consistency of usage. Investing in that a little bit can pay huge dividends further on down the road.
Excellent. Bridget, let's on the kind of the corollary to that from where you've sit, what have you seen with aspects of the nonprofit missions that might be better suited for technology and enhancements, given the kinds of tools that are out there?
Yeah, so kind of in that first category of productivity pieces, which maybe just in sticking with this places to get started, I think is obviously an easier place to start, both also just internally often. I think we are seeing organizations use tools a lot for aspects of fundraising, whether that's marketing and outreach to donors and writing newsletters, or actually, taking first drafts of funding proposals, again, ideally maybe grounded in the proposals you've already written. We know that that's a pain point for many organizations, particularly as development teams may be shrinking. I think there's also a lot that tools can do for sort of basic data analytics. So kind of, uploading sheets of even messy data in some cases and asking for outputs from that is another common use case that I think can be helpful again for especially small teams. And then, yeah, big fan of just what's already embedded in kind of the existing tools. So, using it to just speed up work, whether that's first drafts or the like. I can mention here maybe two of my favorite tools, which are our deep research tool. There's also one in ChatGPT and otherwise, but this is basically a tool that lets you, have to sort of select that model. It's a deeper reasoning model, and it takes more time to go out and actually research work that you ask it to work through and come back with a pretty usually well-synthesized report that's cited with sources. So it's kind of, especially I work across a lot of different topical areas constantly. And so being able to get up to speed on something without having to go and do all of the primary research myself has been extremely helpful. And then the other one that I'll just mention quickly is Notebook LM. This is one of my other most used tools, and it is a place where you can add your documents to a particular kind of small space and just query those documents in natural language. Mm-hmm. So I use it often when I'm, someone may be trying to get up to speed on a bunch of research reports that are coming out from our AI teams that I'm trying to synthesize and would prefer to, kind of interact with them in a different way. This is also, you may have seen the tool that, this is the tool that makes the podcasts out of documents. So it might be something that some of you have come across. It also, just this week, we announced a capability to make video presentations. So kind of little animated snapshots. So you can even have, if you learn better that way, you can have a research report or something more complex distilled out. So there are fun ways of kind of taking a more multimodal interaction mode. And all of those are like just easy little on-ramps to think about, how might those productivity pieces shift. And then there was the sort of programmatic side where we have a lot that we've done to sort of look at different areas that we think are kind of best suited for AI applications at the moment. But I'll maybe leave it there just for now and we can come back to it.
Okay.
Brigitte, I'll just very briefly plus one
ahead, Mark,
Notebook LM. I've been experimenting with that and I've been very impressed by the results.
Excellent. And I had just seen it, but I haven't played with it. But Brigitte, do you want to go ahead and just continue with that kind of areas that are suitable for AI?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, I think, at this point. But I think we do see a lot of value. I already alluded a little bit to the sort of climate and environment space where having, data sets that are essentially at Earth scale are quite complicated. And so these tools are enabling us to interact with those data sets in much more efficient ways. So we're able to look at deforestation. We're able to look at a community level. Where are we looking at? Where do we see heat islands? And where might we see, kind of an analysis of tree equity within a particular community that might indicate where planting trees would be more effective for actually reducing extreme heat over time. So kind of at every scale, right, from, a neighborhood up to the full planet, those models, I think, are really profoundly useful. Also true for biodiversity tracking in general, and also for extreme weather events. So we do a lot at Google in modeling crisis events, hurricanes, flood forecasting, the like. And what's really important about that, and something that I spend a lot of time on at google.org and I continue to work on in my current role, is how do you pair those kind of forecasts with action, right? That's government that's acting there. That's the Red Cross. That's entities around the world who are actually responsible for, helping communities potentially get out of harm's way and to recover. So we do a lot of thinking about what that last mile element is. And that's another way to be interacting, right? It may not be that you're building AI or using it yourselves, but actually the outputs of AI models, the data that it might indicate in terms of where you would focus your resources and time are also a really important, I think, input for a lot of nonprofits as we look forward. There's a lot in healthcare that we could talk about kind of profoundly across the full spectrum from, where we might end up in terms of sort of a healthcare that's much more tailored and targeted to individuals. But right now we do a lot, particularly in the global South, that's really focused on, supporting better diagnostics where we are lacking in health infrastructure, but it's also true across the rural US and actually some places, and also supporting patient outreach for fidelity with treatment plans, which is also kind of an relatively easy in terms of actually doing the intervention, but hard in terms of the sort of human hours required to do that sort of outreach and follow-up. We don't often have the volunteer capacity. We have countless examples across crisis counseling and hotline work. Someone mentioned Jim Fruchterman. He does incredible work in this area, all the way through to sort of frontline benefits access. Again, another place where we often are asking people to interact with highly complex forms across multiple different platforms certainly it should be possible that that we're seeing AI actually optimize some of that. Education, economic opportunity, right? It's kind of everywhere at this point, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor for some of the things that we're seeing across the organizations that we work with.
That's amazing. I'm sure we'll have questions at the end. People might have specific questions about particular areas if you've seen it. Just kind of getting back to some practical applications. We've talked a little bit about, identifying, being ready, having a sense where the scoping it, where it might be. And how do you got to keep this stuff going, right? So maybe we've invested it. How do you help train people? I mean, this stuff is coming fast, as you were saying, Bridget. What you thought maybe 2 months ago is not what wasn't even possible then, and now things are available. How do you work on internally in organizations maintaining their education and knowledge and training them, particularly if you find smaller organizations that don't have a dedicated IT staff, or maybe you've got a couple of folks who are in technology, but they not everybody can get up to speed. What's the best way to kind of do that internally? Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll offer a few thoughts here, and I'll turn it over to Bridget. First of all, there's kind of a baseline understanding, the expectation setting, right? It's like not everyone is going to become a wizard overnight. Not everyone needs to be an expert on these things, right? And just kind of set expectations realistically is kind of a first thing. Another thing as well is that just inevitably, once you get past a very small group of people on a team, you're inevitably going to have people that'll be slower adopters of technology and will need additional kind of hand holding or just time to process these sorts of things. And this is not a judgment on their skills or their experience or anything like that. It's just it can be a personality type, or just more comfortable with kind of a more relationship in person type of thing, rather than having work mediated by technology. So there's that aspect of it as well. And I think later on in this, there's a lot of sort of free resources that can be deployed out there in terms of videos and things like that. Definitely leverage those, but just in terms of that kind of human aspect and the kind of that last mile approach, this is related to the change management stuff I've been talking about. This is just a general reminder. This is the risk of stating the obvious, right? Sending an email link to your staff with an AI training video and say, "Hey, everybody, watch this," does not constitute a training program, right? There is the very basic thing of you can send that email out, but then also say, "Hey, we're going to dedicate time in our next staff meeting to talk about the video and what that meant to us, what we learned from it, and what questions we still have." That's that kind of last mile change management. Socialization is another buzzword that actually was it's commonplace, but it's actually relatively new to me in my professional career. And that what that basically just means is, have you socialized this new idea? Have you talked about it with people, and have they grasped it? Do they kind of get it? And as opposed to you just sent an email out with some new information, and you have no idea if they kind of really absorbed that or not. So those are just some initial ideas there in terms of some very baseline level professional development for staff in this area.
What about you, Bridget? I mean, you've mentioned yourself, you have to kind of collect you're trying to keep up with what's going on in the research arm of Google and summarize it. What's your advice, or sort of thinking about other folks, that's particularly smaller nonprofits?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I often say, just to make people feel better, that I sit where I sit, which is literally currently in one of the research buildings of Google, and I also have trouble keeping up. So if you're not keeping up, it's not you, it's us. I do think that first of all, it's also okay to not be totally keeping up, right? There's a lot of noise in the system right now, and actually the sort of mega difference between one model or another is going to be fairly marginal at this point for most of the use cases that we're talking about. And actually, we talk a lot about sort of what we call the capability overhang. Our current models are able to do a lot of things that we haven't even fully explored yet because of the pace of change. So I think that's one thing, to just sort of say, look, this is going to keep changing. Let's be in it. But I think you also have to be kind of in it, right? So I think part of this, and this is true more than any other technology that I've sort of interacted with in my career, part of it is just using it. There's kind of no replacement. Unfortunately, you can sort of, I think it's important that people understand what's going on behind the scenes of a model, because to the great comment here, right, it's important we understand that these hallucinate. These are not pulling facts. These are actually making up words. hallucination rates, that's hard to say, are coming down. And I think we'll continue, of course, see people optimizing for that. But just that baseline knowledge, I think, is really important for you and for any employees, so that you actually have more, you're less keeping up with sort of where the models are today, and you more have the framework to operate in about what this technology is and what it isn't. So that then when new things come into the frame, you kind of can understand where to place them. The other just very practical thing that I've seen work to this point on kind of the experimentation being an important part, I think, of actually understanding the capabilities, in addition to some courses. So I can also share through, we have a course called Google AI Essentials that does a lot of that frame setting, I would say. And then also useful, we have some prompt libraries for nonprofits, right? So there are a lot of things out there in terms of resources. But the other thing, practice, and actually a number of our teams internally to use this practice as well, is to just build kind of small groups that are sort of experimenting with these tools together and meeting weekly and saying, this is what I did in my job this week, and sharing the prompt they used, getting, sort of input and feedback. It has both the shared benefit of kind of, learning, but also of kind of understanding how the technology is being used a little bit across the organization too, which is it's all kind of evolving at the same time.
Mark, I see you nodding your head. Well, I think it's good to have some folks who are, working teams, maybe across departments or something, to experiment and work together. Maybe that gets people focused on an actual problem rather than, putting in the groundwork what's actually necessary for the organization. One thing you mentioned noise out there, and for sure there is. I mean, if you just, look up training videos, right, on YouTube, there's 1,000. For people or for nonprofits who are thinking maybe to invest more money in this, like, is there a point at which you think that they should really, people should bring a staff on, you make sure that probably one of your board members is, an expert in it. And then what about, either paying for one of these, outside consultants? Is there, like, how do people kind of be careful and kind of know when they can keep stuff internally, and when it's like, this is just taking too much time to figure out how to do prompt engineering and I'd rather hire somebody? Any thoughts on that, Brigitte? I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll be curious for Mark's thoughts on this, but I think there's actually a lot that you can do before you need to get to that point for these tools. That's different than, implementing something like a CRM, right? Like, this is something that you can potentially incorporate into your workflows in a much more lightweight way than having to say, refactor all the way that your technology is configured. And so I think it's in some ways quite a different type of technology in that way. Now, fundamentally, at some point, you may say, hey, we can imagine a world in a couple of years where maybe there is a much deeper integration, or where perhaps you need to shift more of your existing work into the cloud, right? So that you can interact with the AI models. But all of that is, I think, a little bit of a second order. To your point, I think it's when you get to that level of complexity that you might need additional capacity and support to potentially look at, okay, how might you need to configure sort of the set of things that you're working through. The other thing I would just say is that I think often there's what I worry especially about, given that I do a lot of work on sort of the use of technology and programmatic work, is that we sort of overly silo technology into, quote, the technology lane, right? Where you have sort of your IT person in charge of your AI deployment. And while that person maybe is a great person to be in charge of the policies and evaluating different enterprise grade tools and making sure they match the security elements that are required for your organization, and also may have some great ideas, it's also very likely the case that ideas, because problems sit in all parts of your organization, ideas are going to sit in all parts of your organization as well. And so having people using these tools, coming up to speed in all, kind of across the board, because you may find optimization opportunities anywhere, or programmatic opportunities anywhere, is, I think, really important. So I think it's a slightly different beast than I think some of the technology that the nonprofit community has had to grapple with, which makes it both more challenging in some ways, but I think actually in some ways more accessible as well.
Okay, Mark, what's your thought on this? Most nonprofits, we get bombed with, as anybody does in any kind of organization, with offers to, like, have us do your AI and technology overview, consultant, and that's just popping up like that. So what are your thoughts on this? I'm sure it mirrors what Brigitte said.
Well, I can't say that I've ever been a kind of an AI consultant, but I've been a consultant in the past. And so I know that, consultants have their time and place. I'll also say that there are other times when consultants, are deployed and, it's not quite the right fit. I think just like kind of second, what Brigitte was saying around sort of like the internal expertise and experimentation. A lot of things that we're talking about here in terms of technology expertise, kind of like getting a good understanding of the fundamental problems. There's just no substitute for that, and that cannot possibly be outsourced. So there's kind of like no shortcut around building that internal expertise, and that applies for a lot of different things, whether it's experimenting with the latest cutting edge AI, or something scaling up to like a big enterprise grade CRM. I'll just kind of offer up some just recent learnings and observations from the field on kind of that balance for in-house versus outsourcing for something like a CRM, which I think will probably be relevant for a lot of people, which is that a repeated thing that we hear is that for, especially as a CRM gets larger, there's just like no shortcut to hiring someone on staff in-house who has a deep expertise on the data in that system and enough technical expertise that they can function as a liaison between the rest of the organization and a consultant that is definitely providing very specific technical advice on how to solve problems, how to actually twist the system to meet your need. So that was a long way of saying like, yeah, like consultants have their place, but there's no substitute for in-house expertise. Since we're talking about CRM, I think I just wanted to very quickly address the question that was brought up in chat of like, if there's we foresee a future where AI could basically take the place of a big enterprise CRM and all the money that's spent in there. I kind of like to think of imagining someone quote unquote vibe coding a CRM, just kind of like sitting there and talking to an AI and feeding it data, and then all of a sudden you kind of have a system. It's conceivable. We're starting to get into kind of like science fiction territory, and this is also very much beyond my area of expertise here. I'd say like in the immediate term, like I'm not seeing that kind of something that I would like count on or plan on for my organization in like coming 5 years or so. That being said, this field is progressing very quickly. You never know. So I guess the future is very much kind of a big question mark in a lot of different ways.
So I'm sure we can have tons of examples and specific questions for these about all the different kinds of technology, but I want to just cover a couple of things before we get to some more questions from the audience. Some of the major challenges for nonprofits is always money, right? And whether it's technology or there's been encouragement to have a larger portion of nonprofits' budgets be invested in that. Otherwise, we don't have silos of data that you have to take that first step, right, to kind of to streamline and institutionalize it. So from Google.org, and I know you're obviously in the field with other kinds of funders. What's the general approach been to AI projects and technology from the funder side?
So we are a funder that primarily funds technology, not exclusively, but certainly through the work that I've done. And I'll say it's interesting because then we do interact with a lot of other funders. There are, I would say, not too many, as I probably don't need to tell you, funders who are exclusively funding technology in the space. And I think even actually it's interesting sometimes the way that organizations, this is less so now, but especially when I started doing this, in the past, people would sort of say like, oh, I would read a proposal budget and say, where's your cloud costs? Where are your where are your computers, basically? And they would be like, oh, I didn't put it in the budget. And I would say, why? It's required for your project. They'd say, oh, I thought you would think it was overhead. I think that's just indicative of the patterning that the funder community has offered to the nonprofit sector for generations, right? This is technology is overhead. Technology lives over here in this sort of other bucket. And I think we are in a profound moment of needing to shift that dramatically. I think every funder needs to be thinking about technology in a different way and enabling nonprofits to be able to experiment with these tools, not so that, to be clear, Google can make more money, right? But because these are profoundly important things that we are all kind of grappling with and may have huge responsibility and opportunity to try to land really important impact from. So I will say we do work with a lot of foundations. Actually, we've organized an event last year to sort of help bring more organizations along and sort of thinking about how to fund AI tools, especially on the programmatic side, where I think often it can feel scary. We also are doing work with an organization called Project Evident, who encourage you to check out some of the resources they've been building for nonprofits and funders. That's really thinking about working in deep partnership with community foundations to work with, kind of bringing them along and some of the doing kind of cohort model with their grantees, which allows for some of that dialogue to happen about, okay, well, what might we do with this? Okay, now the funder, kind of major funder in our community is actually seeing that and grappling with it with us. So I offer those just a couple of examples, but I think fundamentally we need to get to a place where every funder is thinking about being a technology funder. And we also, because we've systematically underfunded technology in the nonprofit sector for decades, we have a lot of catching up to do, actually, to be able to take advantage of this moment. I will say I'm heartened by the level of the conversations that's happening now that certainly not happening a couple of years ago. I think that's actually one of the benefits of the hype cycle, is that more people are coming to the table and saying, I guess we should do something about AI. And now us and others who have more experience are kind of trying to help them figure out what to do.
Well, that's very good news for nonprofits to know, and thank you for bringing them along. Mark, we've heard from the sort of outside external funders. From the inside, how do you make that business case for, for this kind of investment to your board or your leadership? And, maybe how do you explain what the return on investment is, rather than this is really important, everybody else is doing it, we should do it?
Yep. Well, that might help, actually, pointing to other people that are doing it. Well, I'll get to that in a second. There's no shortcut around the fundamentals, right? To leadership that, is expecting things at, kind of at an executive type of level, or board members as well, right? Clear challenge statements, specific articulation of how the solution addresses the challenges, right? Like, it's a kind of a no BS audience right there. So there's no shortcut around kind of, just like having that really well thought out. I would just add into that as well, due diligence on alternatives. Like, we looked into B, C, and D, and we did our research in these, and these are not good options. This is why we're recommending A. Again, something that kind of like seasoned executive audience is going to expect. And then also taking a moment to just acknowledge and articulate risks, even if that's not something that is headline to your proposal to your leadership or to your board. That's evidence that you've done the due diligence, but that you've also just thought critically and stepped outside of yourself a little bit, and consider, well, what could go wrong with this. It shows that you're taking this, that your thought process is serious. Also, that is part of a serious thought process is peer research, and being able to show that so-and-so nonprofit over there is doing this, and they've had this type of experience with it. I found in my experience that actually does go a long way in helping secure a case. Now, that by itself, of course, is not going to seal the deal, but it's part of a broader kind of evidence of the due diligence package for making a pitch for any sort of new technology solution.
As part of this due diligence, thinking about fiduciary duty is also for the organization itself. Could each of you say me a quick something about data privacy? You mentioned a little bit, Brigitte, about the value of enterprise systems, but anything else about guidelines, policy uses, policies, other privacy things you want to just take away that people should really be front of mind? And then I'll get back to you, Mark, on the practical side too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I spoke briefly earlier about sort of the AI policy builder. I will just say, I think partially because of the systematic underfunding of technology and data in the sector, it also can be the case that, we are actually we are sometimes, not storing private information, beneficiary information, perhaps as best we should. And so I do think, particularly when we start thinking about layering AI models on top of something like that, just being really clear to make sure that you have good, personal identifiable information policies, especially just a flag, because I think many of us have seen that kind of come up in the past, and the problem that can only be compounded when you start thinking about kind of ingesting some of that data into tools like this. The other thing we talk a lot about is just responsible use. And I think actually I would say the nonprofit community is sort of best positioned to do this. You all think about bias in your programs. You think about, equity. You think about how we're delivering things fairly into the best possible outcome, much more so than, folks who are perhaps living in a more commercial world. But I think, being able to sort of equip yourselves with an understanding of where those risk surfaces might be, to Mark's point, which are going to look different in every different organization based on the communities you serve and the work you do. Also just help you kind of keep yourself honest that you really are making sure to look out for those risks as you move forward with any kind of implementation.
Excellent. Mark, from your perspective, some of these risky things we can try to guard against or plan for?
Yeah, just a couple of quick thoughts here. One is that a mindset of privacy policy, privacy protections for data might not come natural to a lot of people. I think, what do you mean? It's like, it's private. It's, it's in this thing. Like, I'm not sharing it with anyone. Well, actually, because of this very complex technology ecosystem that this thing resides in, you've actually created a huge privacy issue with that. I think that's like that's a kind of a shorthand way of saying like the privacy piece can be hard to wrap your mind around. And the other quick thought around this as well, in terms of just like, governance and privacy and things like that, is that, yes, the nonprofit sector is well positioned to kind of think about responsible use for things. That being said, like, well-intentioned staff without any sort of guidance, there is quite a high likelihood that they will, misuse something, not because they're trying to do something wrong, but because they're just being enterprising. And, you want to be able to harness that instinct in a positive direction, rather than just like, let people loose without any sort of guidance. And the next thing they've uploaded a huge spreadsheet of your data into the public ChatGPT.
Excellent. All right, as we're winding down, Brigitte, maybe just talk, what are some of the most exciting emerging trends that you're seeing being implemented in the social impact space? You mentioned some of the environmental ones, but just generally, if anything, what are you most excited about seeing some of the applications?
Wow, I'm excited about a lot of things. I'm really excited about the work on weather, and it sounds a little bit wonky, but it is actually like pretty fundamental when we think about just sort of the changing climate, but also safety and resilience in cities, agriculture, and sort of the changing nature and needs of that important sector for so much of the world. So, and I think we were actually seeing like profound breakthroughs in what's possible there. We've never had computer-based weather models that were running on giant old, like NASA-style Fortran computers. And so where we might get to the next decade there is exciting. And then I'm excited to see where we'll go in this agentic era, right? This idea of agents, which is a whole nother layer on top of this that I think we'll expect to see really coming to fruition in the next couple of years.
Excellent. I'm waiting for my personal agent to have on top of
Me
my
too.
entire
Yes.
ecosystem. Mark,
Anyone
what about
who can answer my emails for me.
Exactly. Mark, what are you excited about?
Yeah, I'll just mention language access and language translation. There seems to be tremendous potential there for the use of AI to kind of break down a lot of language barriers. And this goes back to, I mentioned kind of the work I've done with a lot of immigrant populations in New York City. Tremendous barriers to participation and accessing all sorts of different resources for immigrant communities. The traditional translation model is very expensive, and if there's a way to kind of break through that, or just like kind of increase scale, like that would be a tremendous benefit of the use of these tools.
Excellent. All right, Brigitte, now we can get back to your favorite tools so far. What do you like to use most? You mentioned that LM.
I think I've already shared it.
I think I've
shared mine. So if you haven't tried out Notebook yet, that's probably my one go-to, Notebook LM.
Okay, Mark, what about yours?
I'm a little bit old school. There's no substitute for like a well-formatted spreadsheet with clean data and a pivot table.
Pivot table spreadsheet, excellent. So folks in the audience, if you want to drop in what your favorite tool is, what you're using the most, please free to do it. I want to look at some questions from the audience. If anybody has anything particular, we've got folks on. This is some bigger issues about, we talked about hallucinations, adopting, developing sense of, it's an interesting idea. Are there centers of excellence? I mean, you mentioned something, Project Evident, Brigitte, in the communities that might be centers of excellence to help other folks. What about internally, sort of to help questions where nonprofits could say, should I do this or how should I do that? Like, where can they go to answer these other than sitting through programs like this?
Yeah. I mean, +1 to Jim's map. And yeah, I'm happily, Rachel, it's possible to share resources after this, perhaps, with people who
Absolutely.
attend.
I think what we'll do is we'll try to get maybe.
I'll aggregate everything that I know of.
I have a working document. We'll try to throw some stuff in there and get out to everybody.
Happily share that. I think this will also speak a little bit to, I think, partially also maybe what's behind this question, which is like, in what areas are we really seeing this be useful? And I do think that varies a lot based on organization, but I mean, I touched on a few earlier. I think in the sort of marketing fundraising area, that's certainly been a place where we're seeing effectiveness. I think also just for organizations that have to do either a lot of volunteer outreach or organizing, or, kind of lots of, basically the types of tasks that are well suited to these tools are things where you have some sort of routine element, and often where you also have something that actually uses language, right, or data, right, something that's kind of in the repeatable workflow. So some of the things I mentioned fit that task, but also other things that you do might fit it that are, perhaps a little bit less generic than that.
Okay, excellent. So we will put together some resources for folks. And there's, one of our Yaleys, Cheryl Conti, just published a book, AI for Nonprofits, Putting Artificial Intelligence to Work for Your Cause. It's a good resource. And, there's no way I can keep up with everything, but we'll try to give you a list of some of the main ones. Brigitte and Mark, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and answering questions and your experience. Kristen, if you want to close us out, please, our Executive Director, Kristen Urquiza.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. And just a round of applause for Brigitte and Mark for this conversation and everyone who attended today, thoughtful questions. I know that I learned a lot. There's a survey that comes right after this webinar. So if you have a few minutes to fill that out and give us any feedback, that helps us continue to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. But the other thing I just wanted to share with folks is that our upcoming Social Impact Conference is happening just around the corner in October, on October 24th. And I just want to invite everyone to check it out, come in person. There's also a live stream option if you're unable to make it out to New York City. But it is an amazing gathering of 250 Yale alumni and friends across classes and schools for one day of learning at the Yale Club. I attended in person in 2023, and it was actually really the impetus that allowed me to want to get more involved with YANA, just being able to have an incredible day and afternoon of deep conversations with folks just like me and just like you who decided to not only go to Yale, but then use as much of your time, talent, and treasure to give back. And so it's a day of inspiration, in which we'll go deep on a whole set of different issues and the opportunity to meet folks. So I put in chat the link to the Social Impact Conference micro website where you can learn more. And really just want to say thank you again to Rachel for moderating this conversation, and to our guest speakers, Mark and Brigitte, and to all of you. I hope you have a great evening, and we will see you on another YANA programming, not in the not too distant future.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.